Welcome to the podcast on social science elements in cybersecurity, where cybersecurity meets the dynamic world of human behavior, society, and culture. I'm your host, Sujit Christy, bringing you deep insights into the fascinating intersections of technology and social science. Cybersecurity isn't just about implementation of technological controls, adoption of global best practices, or industry standards. It's about understanding the human elements that drive decision making, risk taking, and trust. How do societal norms influence our online behavior? What roles does psychology play in shaping security practices? And how can industries harness this knowledge to create a safer digital environment for everyone? Today, we are diving into these thought provoking questions with Donovan Cheah, an esteemed cybersecurity professional based out of Singapore, whose work explores the human aspects of digital security. Join Circulo di CISO as we uncover the social science side of cybersecurity and discuss how it shapes the future of our connected world. Donovan, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, hi Sujit. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so happy to be here today.
So, diving straight away,
Mm,
everything is human centric. While,
mm.
while on one side we talk about technology, but our conversation is going to be on human behavior analysis. Right, so I'd like you to tell our audience, how does it matter? How would human behavior strengthen cybersecurity efforts?
I think that's a good start, and that's because often when we talk about cybersecurity, we always think about the technology, and that's probably because we get quite distracted by the latest trends in tech. Like for example, you have AI now. People were talking about all sorts of possible harms that can be done, and sometimes even cybersecurity professionals get carried away, right? If you go to conferences nowadays, you will hear people talk about Gen AI risk, you talk about prompt injection in models, data theft, etc. And to be fair, these are legitimate topics, these are popular topics, and these are topics people want to listen to. But let's come back to some basics. First of all, when we have technology, at the end of the day, the end user is not a computer, but a human, right? So technology has to serve the functions, serve the purposes and desired outcomes that humans seek to achieve by using said technology. And the same goes to cybersecurity, because if you think about wanting to make sure that we are, safe from digital threats, we need to think about our users as well. And that's where people come in. So as you mentioned in your introduction, it's not just technology, it's not just process, but also people. And arguably, I would say people are the most important, because if people are not trained, are not aware of how to use technology safely and securely, then I'm quite sure we would see lots of issues that come up, simply because humans are quite vulnerable, in the sense that we fall for various psychological tricks, and that's because that's just the way we are. It's
Mhm.
not because we are um, it's simply because we are not machines, right? We have
True.
weaknesses.
So if you were to extend this
Yes.
conversation further,
Mm.
humans are unpredictable. Is that a contributing factor to cyber risk?
Mm. So as I mentioned just now, right, that humans can have certain weaknesses, and some weaknesses are predictable. I give you an example, right? In many of our applications today, we need passwords, and often you will see this prompt that goes, "Oh, make sure you have at least 8 characters in your password: one uppercase, one lowercase, one number, and one special symbol." Right? For those who are new to cybersecurity, this is called a password policy, right?
Yeah.
And such regulations have changed over the years. It started with minimum 8 characters, with none at first. Then they go, oh, people were keying in weak passwords, so we need to introduce some password complexity requirements. And so you have minimum 8 and various class of characters. And then they go, oh, 8 is not long enough because, well, if you get a nice GPU to try to crack passwords, it will crack that in no time. So length matters. And so, okay, you talk about an extension in length up to a certain, character limit. Now, of course, some folks will say, oh, they can't comply to this because when they build their application, their database had constraints. And so this is why you sometimes see this very strange quirk that, some applications will have a maximum limit to the number of characters you can have with your password. It is something I have a pet peeve over because I want my password long, so why don't you allow me to do that? But here, what do users do when you have these kind of password complexity requirements? Well, users skirt around them. If the password is too complicated, they'll just write it on a post-it and they'll paste it there, or they'll just save it on the Telegram chat. And this is a real issue. This is not something that I just spun out because in Singapore, when we had, I would say, the largest data breach in history so far as of time of recording, and I hope it stays this way, right?
I hope so.
This was in 2018, where basically the healthcare database in Singapore got breached. It was basically called the SingHealth data breach. Quite big, about 1.5 million records were stolen. And one of the control failings was that they used a password which was weak. Well, guess what? They published the password in the report, and the password was quite literally this: capital P at SSW0RD. 8 characters. Fulfills password policy, right? Minimum 8 characters. Has all the types of characters. Is that a strong password? Nope. So then NIST realized something. It's like, okay, these password policies were not really working. And so they decided, okay, let's just drop password complexity requirements altogether. Now, this is not a universal thing because if you look up some other standards like PCI DSS, you will realize that they did not do the same. So here, there lies a question. Who's right? So what do you think, Sujit? Who do you think is right before I give you my own view?
The users are always right because they want better experience over security.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
for security pros, it is most complexity. But as far as the users are concerned, it's convenience, experience.
Yeah.
So that's a dilemma.
Yes. So you can see in some of the big tech firms, they're actually advocating something called passwordless authentication, right? Whereby we know that it's tiring to remember passwords, and the good old security adage that we tell people, you shouldn't recycle your passwords because if an attacker finds out one, then he will use it all over the place. Well, that's technically true, but we also know people don't remember so many different passwords simply because there are just so many different web applications we use. And trust me, even security professionals may not be that diligent about this. Right?
That's the human limitation, isn't it?
Exactly, human limitation, right? So think about this from the perspective that we are just not very good at remembering things. This includes phone numbers too, right? How many phone numbers do you remember?
Only my wife.
Not even your parents? Not even the children?
Nope.
But I guess that sums up this, right? If you remember like maybe one phone number, how many passwords do I realistically expect anyone to remember?
This one?
Exactly that, right? That's why you see that in some of the bigger technology firms like Microsoft, like Google, they're trying to advocate passwordless authentication, like Windows Hello, etc. And I think that's in general a good direction. But then also lies some other issues as well, and some other issues will revolve around the copious use of your smartphone as an authentication factor, because it's basically what you have. And for those who are new to cyber, then well, just to give you a recap on authentication methods, we have been talking about passwords for the longest of times. So passwords is something which we call what you know. So that's one form of authentication. Then what you have, a smartphone, for example, or hardware token, is a second form of authentication, stronger than the first because you need to actually be in physical possession or something. And then the strongest is called who you are, which is called biometrics. Like for example, my iris or fingerprints, right? And of course, with these authentication methods, there comes the next question: what is most convenient for the user? What's most secure from the perspective of a cybersecurity professional? And actually, if you think it is such a straightforward conclusion that hey, who you have is much stronger because you obviously don't need to remember anything like that, and that no one's going to chop your finger to try to authenticate, or at least I hope so. then you may have to consider the fact that if the data breach happens, your fingerprints are stolen, you can't just change your fingers.
Correct. That's right.
Right?
Donovan, before we
Yes.
move to the other section, I have one question for you as part of this
Yes.
first episode.
Yes.
Uh, is it true that the individual's risk perception is not right? Is that they don't perceive it correctly? Is that why they look for ease or simple convenience in terms of use of password, but since we are dwelling on passwords?
To be fair to the users, I don't think it's so much a risk perspective, and I will mention why. In all the discussions that we mentioned so far, right, we talk about
Mhm.
users, we talk about them not remembering very much, etc. It was not so much a conversation of risk. In fact, the risk word did not even come up once. We didn't even mention the concern over whether or not a certain password is strong enough or not. So I think here we need to think about the user experience. And user experience comes in many different ways. For example, number of clicks to basically use a feature, right? And I give you a simple example. And this is a simple example that I think many people are familiar with in the cybersecurity landscape. We talk about this concept of zero trust, right?
Okay.
So what does zero trust mean? It
For
depends on who
me,
you
it
ask.
means, yeah, for me personally, do not
Mhm.
assume trust. Do
Right?
not assume
So
trust.
So let's take this to a very strict interpretation. Okay. Let's say you're using a bank application. Very sensitive. It involves money, right? So you
Yep,
log into a bank application. There's some MFA. Okay, that's fine. And then you see your bank balance, right? So zero trust means I'm worried that somebody may take over your account with every function that's being used. So what we're going to do is that for every new function that you want to access, we will challenge you again. And in fact, some bank applications do this. So for example, if
absolutely.
you want to withdraw money, transfer money out from an account, past a certain threshold, or you want to change that threshold, you will need to be challenged again. Basically,
Correct.
you will be asked to key in some credentials once again. So that is a very strict interpretation of zero trust. But now imagine if I take this model and I apply to everyday applications, like for example, social media. Imagine you go onto LinkedIn, you want to write a post and someone says, wait, that may not be you, so please authenticate again. So now you see why this term zero trust becomes a very misleading term, because vendors like to use it. We love to use it. We love to sound very smart in front of our audience. But what
Absolutely.
it means is so relative. So when we say don't trust, what are we really saying?
In what
So here,
context?
exactly. And if the user experience becomes so bad that, for example, the user say this is not worth my time, then business starts telling you, hey, you can't do this. You have to relax the cybersecurity posture. So that's the trade-off that we have to do in from a social science perspective, right? Understanding what our users are willing to tolerate before they start telling you, no, I'm not going to use your app anymore.
That's very interesting, Donovan. I mean, your
Mm,
point of view, right? I mean, especially the last observation you made.
mm.
Zero trust cannot be generic and can't be used as a standard across the board. It
Yeah.
has to be seen in relative to what you're trying to protect.
Mm.
So if organizations do not get that right, the users will break every single rule because they would look out for the easiest way out
Yes.
because they do not want to waste time trying to do those challenges because they would see that it is not worth their time and
Yeah.
it will break the security.
Mm.
Closing thoughts, Donovan, before we wrap this episode?
Yeah, actually, the subject of human behavior is really, really interesting. And honestly, I think even if we went over time, right, like I think 15 minutes now, it really doesn't do justice to the complexity of human behavior with
Absolutely.
respect to technology, with respect to cybersecurity. I feel we don't talk too much about the topic. And so I hope that this gives a good starting point for more to
Okay.
engage on this and to really understand how humans interact with some of the cybersecurity paradigms that we have and how we can make the cybersecurity journey easier for our users.
Absolutely. So my
Mm,
takeaway from all what
mm,
we discussed, it is important. for us as security professionals to pay attention to the human behavior. If we don't factor that into anything, especially when we say zero trust, then it will become futile because we may not get the desired results. So, Donovan, thank you so much for your time. And viewers, this is the first episode in a series of 5. So, we're going to be discussing various other topics as part of this series. And that episode will be on cultural and political impacts. So, viewers, hit that subscribe button, follow us, share your views, comments, and if you have anything you would like us to discuss, please share those as well. And we would ensure that we bring the professionals to the platform and have a conversation on those topics as well.